mean, I wanted to. I really wanted. I didn't want to exist, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to make that happen, and I was too much of a coward, really. But there were times when I was, I felt really lonely. I didn't really have anyone to talk to at home because my mum wasn't there. It was just my brother, my older brother, and my dad, and then there was no one talking to me at school. And I remember just feeling so lonely and thinking that what is this? If this is life, what's really what is the point?
Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then please hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. It really helps make sure that these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. My guest today is the multi-award-winning broadcaster, journalist and writer, Aasmah Mir. Starting her career on Scottish TV, Aasmah has worked on our screens and on our radios for over 25 years, including as co-presenter of Saturday Live on Radio 4, Radio 5's Drive show, and now as the co-presenter of Times Radio's Breakfast show. But behind all this success lies a story of trauma and of resilience, of a young girl, the daughter of Pakistani immigrants who faced crises of racism, identity and loneliness, who dealt with the heartbreak of seeing her severely autistic brother sectioned, and who, as a teenager, very nearly lost the voice that would later become known to millions. Aasmah has revealed this story in a moving new memoir, A Pebble in the Throat. In fact, it is a joint memoir, the drama of her own childhood brilliantly entwined with that of her mother, Almas. A story that, as a result, spans 5 decades and 2 continents, that Aasmah has chose to write this remarkable book, just as her marriage ended and as she became a single mum to her young daughter, is, I'm sure, something that we will also discuss. Aasmah, welcome to Crisis What Crisis.
Thank you very much.
How you doing?
When you put it all like that, it's quite terrifying, really. I suppose it's intense, isn't it? When you have to summarise someone's situation. So yes, goodness me.
I hope I got it. I hope I got it about
You did.
Right.
You got it completely right.
Great. I listened to you on Times Radio this morning, a job that you get up for at about 3:30 in the morning.
Something like that, yes.
A demonstration of your resilience right there. You obviously have an incredible work ethic. Where does that come from, do you think? What's the voice telling you to get out of bed every morning?
It's definitely my mum's. My mum always just said to me, just get on with it, just do it. When you have a really horrible week ahead of you, for example, and you're thinking, oh no, I can't believe I've got to do this and that, and I don't want to do this, but I have to do it. And half of me wants to kind of run away and hide. But then I just remember my mum just working through all this stuff, whatever it might have been. It might have been something to do with the family or to do with the business or the family business or whatever. And she would just be like, just do one task at a time and get through it. It's like climbing a ladder. It's like stepping stones over a lake. You just do one thing at a time. And once you get to the end, it will be over and you won't have to do that ever again. But you can't not do it. You just you can't give up. Never give up.
Tell me about the book and how it came about, the process with your mum. How did you write it together?
So the logistics of it were interesting in that I was always going to just write a straight memoir. And then someone actually said, I don't know if you read the acknowledgement, someone said to me, who'd want to read that? I remember thinking, oh, that's quite rude, but I'll make sure I will write that now. I'm sure you can all guess who that was. And then I spoke to my mum about something. I was trying to, fact check a couple of things. And I said, Mum, it was really difficult, because when we were growing up, there was quite a lot of racism around because it was the 70s, it was the 80s. People were just not familiar with people who were different at that point. It's different today. And that's
a very forgiving attitude.
But it is
we'll get onto that.
I think it's true, though. I really do. I'm less forgiving of people who are racist today. And she kind of had that look in her eye. It was like that slightly not quite understanding. And I said, well, of course you wouldn't understand, Mum, because you didn't face racism as a child. You grew up in Pakistan with people who looked like you. You didn't stick out. And if you did stick out, it was only for good reasons, because you were head girl and you were, chief this and chief that and all the rest of it. And she said, well, let me tell you something, young lady. And then she started telling me about her domestic setup. And I didn't know any of this because a lot of that generation, my mum's 78, a lot of that generation do not wallow, they do not indulge, they do not poor me. They don't do any of that. We just got on with it, and then they forget about it.
You don't do a lot of it, Aasmah, but we'll get onto that.
Other people might disagree with you, but anyway.
Yeah.
So then she started telling me about her setup. I don't want to ruin too much of it, obviously, because it's in the book, but she had a difficult domestic setup. So she said to me, actually, that things were not that stable at home, whereas I had a very stable home life. I mean, there were issues with my brother, but there was no instability. We were all a unit. I had a mum, I had a dad, and that was it. I had one mum and one dad, which was just about enough. So then I suddenly got this idea of actually, why don't we do the two together? So it was a really long process. I gave her this notebook. I think it was just before lockdown, actually. I gave her this notebook and I said, Mum, can you just every day, write, or maybe every week, just write something about these themes that I've given you. So one would be food, one would be primary school, one would be secondary school, one would be your home life, one would be sport, because she was really keen on sport. She was an amazing badminton player. Can you just write that down? Because I thought, if I just do this the normal way, she's just not going to get it. Because when I ask my mum stuff, she doesn't answer in the way that an interviewee would. She answers the way that a mother would.
Yes.
Anyway, so she wrote down all the stuff, and then I would phone her up, because then lockdown came, and I would phone her up and I'd ask her the stuff and I'd write it down, and then I'd make it into something. And then once I'd done it, I would print off that chapter, send it to her by Royal Mail. Yeah. And she would read it and make little corrections, because my mum was a primary school teacher, so she loves correcting things. And I would say, can you just check it for fairness and accuracy? Those good old values. Yeah. Because obviously there's an entire family and extended family to consider. And I said, Mum, you're the fairest person I know. If you say it's fair, no one will argue. And then I'd phone her up and she'd say, okay, page 2, this bit, change that. That's not quite right. That's not quite fair. And that's how we did it, down the phone.
Did the process and did the finished product make you closer to your mum, do you think?
Well, you know what it should have done, but of course everything coincided with a marriage breakdown, and from that stemmed a really difficult situation with my family, actually. My mum I'm incredibly close to, but we actually grew apart slightly, weirdly, post marriage breakdown and divorce, not because my parents disapproved of it. They were like, absolutely 100% get divorced.
Right.
Wasn't that. What it was that they weren't very good at dealing with I was going to say upset, but I'm not even sure that I ever showed any upset, because I was just powering through every day, trying to keep everything afloat. And so they weren't very good at discussing with me the kind of emotional fallout of what happened. They were very good at discussing the practical admin side of things. Are you going to sell the house? What should you do? What do you need any help? Can we help you with this? Can we help you with that? Right. But no one ever sat down and said, are you okay? Maybe I'm glad, because even just hearing that now, I'm kind of thinking, oh, no, I wasn't okay. Yeah. But anyway, so they were quite... a
bit detached.
A bit, yeah. I was going to say cold, but that's not fair, because my parents are adorable. They were just a bit detached about it all. And I actually, into that chasm, that gap of emotion, that dearth of emotion, I became very angry, actually. And I just remember thinking, I'm so angry that this thing has happened to me and no one has said to me, are you okay? Why was it that it was people on Twitter that were saying this to me and offering me their spare rooms and their nannies and, whatever? It was strangers. Yeah. Maybe it's easier for strangers, I suppose, isn't it?
It is, perhaps, yeah.
But so in a way, actually, we grew apart while I was writing it. It was really difficult. So we grew apart, and then I had to come back and do this. And so I don't think it did bring us closer, weirdly. I think it would have done in normal circumstances. But to be honest with you, I was already so close to my mum. Like, I would speak to her all the time. If ever I need any advice, I ask her, but not so much anymore. And that's not just because of the kind of fracture. I think also just because, she's getting older. I don't want to burden her anymore.
Yes.
So I don't know, maybe I'm preparing for the inevitable. I don't know.
Well, we have this thing, don't we, where it's a kind of, it's the accepted practice that as you get older, you must therefore get closer to your parents.
Yeah.
That is that's the way we do it, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be.
No.
And also, for good reason, sometimes it just isn't that way.
Yeah. I would say that it's definitely not the case with my mum because we were already close, but it is with my dad.
Yeah.
Because in the book, we have this really tricksy period from about maybe about the age of 11 or 12.
Yes.
The teenage years are horrendous. Like, I can't even be in the same room as him. I won't go into politics, but politically we were completely on polar opposites. And I just thought he just wasn't, he didn't have the same kind of values and beliefs as I did. And I found that really difficult to reconcile. I think he was very much a typical dad of the 80s.
Yes.
A little bit unreconstructed.
Yes.
And I found that difficult.
Loved his news, though, right?
Obsessed by the news.
Which clearly seeped into the DNA.
It must have done. How weird, though, because he loved cricket, and so I hate cricket now because he used to force us to watch test matches, which were just so boring, and force us to watch the news. But yeah, that's weird. I don't know how that happened, but we are definitely much closer now. And to be honest, my dad, he apologized to me actually, maybe 2 years ago or so. He just said to me, "I'm really sorry, by the way, about how I was when you were a teenager." And again, I don't blame him, as I say in the book.
After reading the book, did he say that?
It wasn't after. No, it wasn't after reading the book. He only read the book quite recently, actually. I think it was after the whole divorce thing and the fact that I didn't speak to my parents for a while, a few months. It was really, really difficult, actually. And there were other members of my family I didn't speak to for 2 years.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it was. I think he suddenly appreciated that they had let me down, that they hadn't been there when I really needed them.
Yeah.
They'd been there practically, but not emotionally. So he sent me this beautiful letter, actually, in his beautiful, very distinctive, spidery kind of doctor's handwriting that I've seen, since I was, 5 years old. And that did the trick. Because it doesn't matter what you've done in life, just apologise, just say sorry and mean it. And then you can have no excuse not to accept that apology if someone does it from the heart and does it just, it's a clean apology. It's not a I'm sorry but, because they're the worst.
Yes. We've gone almost to the sort of end of the story, and without wishing to turn this into a therapy session, if we go back to the childhood, there are already, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, is that linked to? So let's tell that story, shall we? Because I think what the book does brilliantly is capture the sort of sadness of a pretty blissful early childhood as it transforms into something much more complex and painful. But should we talk very briefly about those happier days? Because you're one of 4 children. Your mum and dad come here from Pakistan in the mid-60s. And at this stage in your life, you describe yourself brilliantly. You're sort of firing on all cylinders. You describe yourself as a relentless show-off, as a young girl always wanting to be the centre of attention. And this bit I really like. I existed and no one could ignore me. And you were also mischievous, putting itching powder into another girl's school ties. Thank you, by the way, for the little cultural 70s references that I'd somehow erased from itching powder. I had somehow erased joke shops. I'd erased from my memory.
Stink bombs.
Just give me a sense of those early days of your childhood.
They were blissful, and I think the reason that I remember them so clearly is because my dad took loads of photographs and loads of Super 8 films of us, and so we haven't watched them in a while because they're kind of inaccessible now. But we watched them a lot for other reasons, and that reinforces. So it's not kind of false memory, it actually happened. And you just see us constantly having birthday parties and friends and relatives and bicycles. And we were always on bicycles. We were always outdoors. We were always in the garden playing cricket or whatever it was. And, we were all really, I think I can only speak for myself because obviously my brother and sister are older than me. My younger brother was younger, but he was in his own world. I just loved it. You know, life was amazing. People were really friendly. I had loads of friends. You know, I think at that age, children don't really notice difference. But obviously, as they get older, they do. But it was wonderful. You know, my dad was incredibly loud, gregarious, generous. My mum always seemed to be happy. I think
successful guy, hard-working, owned business, owned and ran a garage. Yeah.
Petrol station. Yeah. We are the petrol station family, basically. And then I think obviously my mum was really happy because she realised she'd married a really good man. And this was an arranged marriage. She hadn't seen him. That's just the way it was back then. And she struck gold. You know, she was really lucky. He was a nice guy. He was a generous guy. He was very loving. He's very romantic. And I think my mum was just so happy because that's what she'd wanted to get away from the unhappy marriage that existed in her own childhood. That of her parents.
And that was as much luck as anything else.
Totally luck. Although I do think, again, that generation just made it work. You know, it's kind of alien to us, but because with all the will in the world, you meet someone, you fall in love, of course you want to make it work. But, you know, I'm proof that it doesn't matter how hard you work, it can still fall apart.
You were especially close to your younger brother, Imran. You shared a bedroom for the first 8 years of his life. He was a boy, I think then undiagnosed, obviously because, you know, understanding was so much different to what it is now. But undiagnosed with severe autism. And you were his protector, really. Well, not really. You were his protector. And there are two pretty dark incidents that you write about where you come to his aid. One in the woods near your home. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Oh, I find this really upsetting to write, actually. So we used to just be packed off. My mum would say, here, have some McVitie's digestives and off you go. And so we'd spend the whole day in the woods having a great time, making dens. You know, we might see friends and we'd you know, play with them or whatever. And there was just this one day I was in the woods and there were these older boys and they were always older boys. And I was a bit wary of older boys just because A, they were boys and B, they were older and they just, you know, they felt kind of, I don't know, physically a little bit more threatening, and they just blocked our way and you said, you know, you can't go or something until you tell us if you eat curry or something like that. And I just remember thinking, because we didn't really call it curry because it was just food, and obviously we ate everything. We ate curry and we ate, you know, fish fingers or beef burgers or whatever. And I just remember thinking, I don't understand what they want me to say. What you know, so maybe I was a bit obtuse. Maybe if I just said, yes, I do eat curry, they would have let us go. But, you know, they didn't. And they just kind of, you know, you can't go until you've said this, you can't do that. And then the whole time I was just very aware that these were not good people and that I had to make sure that my little brother didn't do anything that made them realise that he had, as we now know, autism. And he was always doing stuff, you know, he was always like, you know, looking at his hands. He'd always be examining his hands very closely. He'd be like swaying on his feet. And so I just kind of, I think I held his hand or something just to stop him from doing anything because I just didn't want them to notice that. And then, of course, he did. He said something random and then you know, they kind of realised. And then they were just very threatening towards him. And I thought they were going to do something horrible to him. And I just didn't know what it was. And I just remember thinking, okay, I'm going to have to either punch them, which is what I would normally do. I did a lot of hitting and punching. Or I'm just going to have to distract them in some way, you know. So I suppose I kind of just put myself in front and said, yes, I do eat curry, or yes, my name is Aasmah, because they were laughing at my name as well. And that kind of distracted them and broke the spell. And then they started, you know, concentrating on me. And I thought, excellent, I've done that. But then luckily someone came by at that point and we managed to just get away because someone distracted them. But I just remember thinking in that moment, like, I won't be able to protect him from these people because they're bigger than me. There's about 3 of them. And I just remember thinking, I can't bear that. I just can't bear it. It's like, if you want to do anything to me, you can, but not to him because he is special. That's the word we used for him. He was special.
So there's obviously just, you know, unadulterated bullying there, but obviously with this racist undertone.
Yeah.
Had you at that stage, you know, you said there, I spent a lot of my time punching and hitting. by that stage, the sort of the realization of what the world would actually mean to you as a young Asian girl in Glasgow, had that begun to dawn on you at that stage?
I'm not sure that it had. I think I was able to explain a lot of stuff away. Like, they're not like everyone else. They're just horrible boys.
Right.
Because there were just a few incidents. There weren't that many. I mean, there was another one when my brother was at school and this boy kept on like calling him this weird word, which is not even a real word. And there was that. But they were quite isolated and they were balanced out by great friends, you know, great buddies, going around to being invited to people's houses and going in for dinner, for tea and, you know, all the rest of it. So I don't think I had absorbed it, because you're quite reluctant to absorb that stuff at that age. Yeah. You're still very optimistic about humanity and people, and you don't really believe it. So I don't think I had at that point, but I think that came later.
Well, let's talk about that, because things got worse at school. You describe an experience in the classroom when your teacher asks you to explain what it is to be a Muslim to the rest of your class. You describe it, I have to say, it's a brilliant bit of writing, but it's also quite a disturbing bit of writing. You're kind of there in the classroom feeling for you, and he keeps just making it worse and worse for you. I mean, tell us what happened, and then tell us how you sort of feel about it now. It feels like a very important moment. I don't know.
So I think there were two moments. They were both in religious education, which was just, everyone hated RE because it was just so boring. No one really cared about religion maybe the way that they do now. They have a more global view of religion. Back then, it was just like weird things that people do in the rest of the world. That's how it felt to kids in the 70s. And why are we learning about this, you know? So the first incident was very much about, you know, we're doing Islam, and of course Islam is how you say it, but everyone would say Islam. So we're doing Islam today, and I'll just be like, oh, okay, you know, this is, why are we doing this again? And then he said, you know, are there any Muslims in the class? And I just remember thinking, oh, I don't think there are. And then I suddenly realized that he was looking at me, and he said, but you're one. And I suppose at that point I hadn't made the connection. It's really weird, you know, these labels that you have.
Because your parents are not devout, though.
No, not devout at all.
No Christmas at home.
No,
actually.
No, but not devout. Like, they would pick and choose. Yeah. Like, I would have said to myself, I I identified more with the word Pakistani than I did with the word Muslim, because it was more of a cultural thing than a religious thing. Anyway, so he just kept saying, well, can you tell us? And I don't think his intentions were malign. I think he was just very, very clumsy. And he didn't have any kind of duty of care towards me, because it was the 70s or the 80s, and teachers mostly didn't really think about things like that. So he was just urging me on, you know, what can you tell us, what they do, what they don't do? And I'm kind of like really scrambling about this point, thinking, I don't actually know. No one's told me. So let me just think about my life and what's different. Okay, I don't eat pork, don't drink alcohol. Obviously, I'm a child anyway. Don't celebrate Christmas. I just flailing about, really. And of course, as you say all these things, all the children around you are just like looking horrified, like, how weird are you? Why don't you eat pig? Why don't you do this? Why aren't you allowed boyfriends? Why do some Muslims marry their cousins? Why do men have more than one wife? And I'm like, I don't know. Don't ask me. I have no idea. No one's explained it to me. And I am not the spokesperson for Islam. But anyways, that was difficult, because at that point...
How old are you at this point?
I would say about 11, 12, maybe, something like that. I just didn't really know, you know. Yeah. Again, I think an 11-year-old today would know more about this stuff. Yes. I really do feel, because they have the internet and, you know, TikTok and all the rest of it. They'd probably know. Someone would tell them what it meant, but I didn't know. Anyway, then there was another incident, and... it was the same thing. It was just the same, picking away at the same sore. And, you know, there was just chaos in the classroom. It was uproar. It was a really horrendous school. And I just got fed up, and I just snapped, and I said something that I shouldn't have said. And everything basically stemmed from that.
So in essence, there's a bully in the classroom. Yeah. Goldie, I think his name is. Yeah. He's going at you both as a bully, but also as a racist. Yeah. Underlying a lot of what he's saying to you, and you actually have been helping him with his homework.
Yeah.
And so you tell the teacher that.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Why don't you have a look at our homework and compare them?
I think you'll find they're very similar. I'll never forget those words, because if I hadn't said them, I think life would have been very different. But it was just that one moment.
Do you really just kind of, that's the moment that you identify as being?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And I just wish, why? I had quite a big mouth still at that point, and I was very much into defending myself. And I think I was just like, I'm not having this. Why? If you're going to do this to me, I'm going to hit back. But I should have known that, that the balance of power was not in my favour at this point, really.
Yeah, but why? You're a
because you're a young
girl.
He's a bully. He was the bully, and he had everyone in his pocket. And if you cross the bully, that's quite a foolish thing to do, isn't it? Really
risky.
Yeah, risky.
Tell us what happened.
So he was obviously furious, and the minute the words came out of my mouth, I remember thinking, oh dear, or words to that effect. This is really bad. I've crossed the bully, the guy with all the power. He's not going to make my life easy. So I initially thought he would just like beat me up, like physically, because that's what was happening at that school all the time. I used to see mainly boys hitting other boys, really there was always blood on school shirts. People's noses were always bleeding. And the girls would attack other girls occasionally, but it wasn't as bad as the boys. But what happened was that this was a Friday, I remember. And on the Monday, I went into school and I just noticed that no one was kind of talking to me. And I thought, okay, fine, whatever. Maybe they just think I'm, a bit of a grass, which I had been. But then he told me in no uncertain terms that no one is going to speak to you. And I remember thinking, well, that's not real. How could that happen in the world? But that's what happened. I think I can't remember my first or my second year at secondary school. It might be my second, I can't even remember. But there were 7 forms or 7 classes in each year. It was such a huge school. If you think about that, 30 in each, 7, 210.
Just give us, it's in Glasgow, but give us a sense of the type of school it was.
It was just a massive kind of like ugly 1960s, huge, just monolithic, horrible school, really, and there's many schools like that were not horrible, but that one was. It had a huge catchment area, and obviously so it had kids from all sorts of places, and it was just, people talk about a melting pot. This was a melting pot as well, but the melting was not good.
Yes.
So anyway, no one did speak to me in that class. And then obviously I didn't know people in other classes, so I just kind of kept myself to myself. And this went on for months, and it was really lonely. It was really lonely because secondary school secondary school can be hard, but it's still supposed to be fun. But no one spoke to me for months.
It's an extraordinary thing. When I was reading it, you sort of, how does that happen? It's an extraordinary thing, and a sort of entire kind of school for you, the school, turning its back on one girl. But actually, I suspect it. I was reading it and I was thinking, well, that can't happen these days. But of course, what you were was cancelled.
I suppose.
That's what happened to you.
Yeah.
Except they didn't have the technology to do it, and I suspect actually there's a version of that happening.
Oh, I'm sure.
In plenty of schools, I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a way, possibly even more painful.
Yeah,
I'm sure. They all live their lives through their phones.
Oh, right? Absolutely. I'm sure of it. And actually, when I think back on it, and people ask me questions like, "But why didn't you tell the teacher?" Well, the teachers wouldn't have cared. They wouldn't have cared, and they wouldn't have done anything. Why don't you tell your parents? Well, my mum wasn't there. She was in Pakistan. My dad was just like, he didn't understand. He was like, well, why just punch them. That was generally what he used to say to me. Just punch them or tell them all. And I'm like, Dad, that's not an answer to this, or just ignore them. It's like, well, I don't need to ignore them because they're ignoring me.
Or sticks and stones, I think someone said to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was no way out of it, really.
Yeah, but this isn't you being blanked by your classmates for a couple of weeks.
No.
This is weeks, months. This goes on and on.
It goes on until the end of the year, thankfully. I think this was like maybe spring, and it went on into June or July whenever school broke up. But it felt a lot longer than that. It felt like a year.
Yeah.
because it was so silent.
And its impact on you was to send you obviously into yourself.
Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned in the intro, that starts to affect in a pretty visceral way how you behave. You kind of stop talking. I mean, you're still communicating at home, I'm sure, but you can't go into a shop. You can't talk to people. You just completely disappear in on yourself.
Yeah. Well, you just lose your confidence completely because you're out of the habit of talking and interacting with people. So you lose that ability. And then I just suppose just all the other stuff, perhaps, that you've been blocking out before about, boys telling you that you smell and you're ugly and, your skin is dirty and your blood, what colour is your blood? And just all the stuff that you've kind of tried to deflect and explain away. I suppose suddenly you start to believe it in a way and you think, well, I can't be worth anything because no one's speaking to me. And maybe they're right. Because I think if you tell someone something every day, subtly or not subtly, maybe sometimes if you're vulnerable and you're a child, you start to believe it. I mean, it sounds ridiculous now.
But it doesn't sound ridiculous because the detail of it is terrible. Because, you just skirted over it there. But, for any parent listening to this with a teenage daughter or an 11, 12-year-old daughter, if that child came home and said, someone scratched my arm with a compass today because they wanted to see whether or not our blood was the same colour. Or if they came home from school and said, we did country dancing at school today, which is another anecdote from your book, where the boy refuses to touch he will dance with you, but he won't touch your hands.
Yeah.
Or your child comes home from school and says, someone was rubbing my arm today because they wanted to see whether or not they could change the colour of my skin.
Yeah.
This isn't sort of, superficial stuff. This is any one of those moments in a child's life.
Yeah.
In the modern context now, I think when we're looking at upbringing in the way that we do, you would see as a pretty significant moment. And you had layer after layer of it.
I did, but you know what? It was very common. So I've done quite a few book signings and a lot of Asian, mostly women, but some men as well, of my age have come up to me and said, that's what happened to me. She says, and they've said, and I sound like I'm bigging myself up here because I'm sure people have written about this, but they've said, I've never seen that mundane existence, that everyday kind of almost like a diary type existence. I've never seen it expressed on a page.
Yes.
And it was a long time ago, and people are kind of a bit like, why are you talking about stuff that happened 40 years ago? But a lot of them felt like they started crying, actually. It was it was really awful. And they were just saying, I kind of wish you hadn't written it because it's upset me, but I'm also glad that you have because we're just expected to forget this stuff and erase it. And actually, it did happen, and perhaps it makes us understand the situation as it stands today. In other words, that things are so much better. And I don't mean to sound ignorant or dismissive of stuff that goes on today, but my God, if I could grow up today, I would do it in a heartbeat. I mean, I really would. Social media notwithstanding, I would, because people know, they understand what I am and who I am and why I have brown skin. Back then, they just didn't understand because no one really had sufficiently explained it to them.
Before we started, we had a brief conversation about, the memoir writer's concern about their book being viewed as a kind of exercise in self-pity. And I said to you that, which I think is absolutely the case, that your book absolutely walks that line brilliantly. Because for me, there isn't a ounce of self-pity.
Okay.
And that's the point, really, is that it's factual, right? You're telling the story of what happened in a very factual way. And although you describe its impact on you, not at any point does it feel like you're wallowing. Quite the reverse, actually. And of course, what happens to your life, which we'll get onto in a minute, is the greatest demonstration of your lack of self-pity. Because I think even then, I'm not sure you were wallowing around. Even then, I think you were. It read to me as though that girl who wanted to exist when she was tiny was still kind of punching away, really.
I suppose so. I mean, I think there's a moment.
How do you sorry to interrupt, how do you look at yourself now at that? You must be quite proud of your teenage self are you?
Proud of my teenage self. What, because I didn't go under?
Yeah.
I didn't. I mean, I wanted to. I really wanted. I didn't want to exist, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to make that happen, and I was too much of a coward, really. But there were times when I was. I felt really lonely. I didn't really have anyone to talk to at home because my mum wasn't there. It was just my brother, my older brother, and my dad, and then there was no one talking to me at school. And I remember just feeling so lonely and thinking that, what is this? If this is life, what's really, what is the point? But I think there was a moment, and I think it's in the book, where I suddenly, maybe a year or two after that incident, I just remember thinking, no, I'm sorry. No. This can't be it. I think the problem is you guys. It's not me. And I can't wait to get away from you. I think that's what it was.
Well, that's an unbelievable realisation. I mean, let's just explain the other part of what's going on here, because we've discussed school, the bullying, the racism, but you've also been separated from your mother at this stage, and the silence at school. As it continues, you're getting through the days. But your mum has, because of your brother's difficulties, has decided to go back to Pakistan, where she thinks that he'll have an easier time of it, really. Yeah. So those two things combined, if you separate them out, even if you break it down, as we just did a minute ago, into those individual incidents, those are all pretty seismic for a young girl. You've got that pile of stuff though on that side, and then you've got being separated from your mother. I mean, it's quite a thing.
It's a lot. It is a lot when you look back at it now, and I think also my
That's
dad.
Why I ask, you must be proud of yourself.
Honestly, I've never really thought of. No, I never really. I don't think I'm not. It's not that I'm not proud. It's just that I don't. I'm not proud of myself because I didn't do much about it. I couldn't do much about it. I had no control or agency at that age. But I think there was just this moment where I just said to myself, you know what, it's not always going to be like this. It's not always going to be like this. And that's why, reading books and listening to stories or watching the news about people who'd kind of done things and, moved away or gone to a different country or reinvented themselves in some way, that really attracted me. And I remember thinking, that things can change. This is not going to be my life for the rest of my life. And indeed it wasn't. So I don't actually look back and think that. I don't know why. I don't think you were rubbish, but I don't think.
I'm not sure there are that many kids of that age who are starting to think, hang on a minute, this isn't life. I can see beyond this. My life will be different. My life will change. That's a pretty mature thought.
Maybe it just goes back to that thing of being a relentless show-off and wanting to be the centre of attention and all those things, and just thinking, hang on a minute, I wanted to do all that. How have I gone so much off course? Maybe it was just wanting to get back to that. I don't know. I'm not sure what it was really, because things felt very hopeless. But I just remember having this realisation that they were wrong, and I was, if not right, then I was innocent anyway.
Yeah. I mean, this podcast at least tries to be useful. And tries to kind of pass on practical kind of, lessons for people who are going through difficult stuff. So if we just stick with that moment in time for you for a second, what would you say to, a girl of your age who's been cancelled for whatever reason, who is now feeling essentially alone and lost? And I think there's a fair number of them these days because of the technology. What would you say? Because you found that voice inside yourself.
Yeah.
What would you say? What would you guide people towards?
It's very difficult because they are they're very different actually, the scenarios, because back then it was just about bullying and self-esteem and that was it. Whereas now it's much more complicated. And I don't have any experience of that because, my daughter's only 7. So, thankfully I'm sure there'll be stuff to come. But I suppose it's very much about trying to detach yourself from the intensity of these social situations. Everyone's in a WhatsApp group and they're all bullying this one girl or whatever. Take yourself out from there. Tell as many adults as possible. try to remember that this is a moment. Don't let these things define you. Don't let them just put you on a downward trajectory for the rest of your life, because that's a waste of your life. And things will get better. Things will be different. They might not be better always, because we're not all Cinderella. But things will be different. This is one stage, and the next stage is going to be different, and the next stage after that is going to be different. And you do have to go through some crap in life, I'm afraid. You do. And parents who overly protect their children and make sure that they don't come into contact with any conflict or problems, that's a really big disservice to your children as well, I think.
Let's pick up the story again. Your mum comes back to Glasgow from Pakistan, but you know that she'll be leaving again, that she'll go back. And you, I think I'm right in saying, you sort of essentially beg to go back with her.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what happens, to a very different life there in many ways, and where your skin colour is viewed as different, but now in a very positive way.
Yes.
Just explain that, but also talk to me, if you can, about the power of perspective, because it strikes me, listening to the story, that you were going back to a relatively kind of wealthy,
yes,
middle-class environment, but in very close proximity to poverty that you'd never seen before.
Yeah.
Which must have provided perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Pakistan was just a whirlwind. I was only there for between 6 and 8 months. But I had been there a few times before. We used to spend Christmases there, which was always a bit weird. But actually living there was odd. There was a lot to get used to, the weather, the food, the people, the language, just everything was different. There was nothing that was the same. TV, music, everything was different, and it was just constantly readjusting to new stuff. But it was really exciting, and at least it wasn't that school that I'd escaped. So I was really happy. You could have taken me anywhere and I would have gone, I think. I just wanted to get that situation. So I went to a school. I went to girls' school there. Obviously, all the kids there were pretty affluent. Not off the scale. It wasn't like Eton or anything like that. It was a middle-class girls' grammar school. And I really loved it. I mean, I didn't really know what I was doing, because they were all doing weird subjects and at different times, and they were at different stages. And I mean, I didn't do particularly well. I think the only subject I did particularly well in was English, because I'd always been quite good at that. And creative writing. That was it, really. The rest of it, I think it was just, I didn't know what I was doing. But no one within the school questioned the colour of my skin. Outside the school, like when you went to the market and the bazaar and you went to relatives' houses or whatever, they would always comment on your skin colour and be like, "Oh, you're so lovely and fair." And I'd just think, what does fair mean? I didn't know what it meant. And a lot of people will say, well, that's your privilege. You're very, privileged to look the way that you do within Asian society. But I, didn't know any of that. And I mean, I don't think I ever used it to my advantage, but people would serve you first in shops. People would stare at you, not in a horrible way. It was just curiosity. And I found this a total 180-degree turn to what I had experienced in Glasgow, which had been that people would stare at you, but sometimes it was curiosity, but most of the time it was hostility.
So is this where you get your kind of, where the kind of realisation of some of the fundamental nonsense of what it is to be a human being kind of comes from?
Yeah.
So you've gone from a place where you got people scratching your arm with a compass to being first in the queue in a shop.
Yeah.
All based on the colour of your skin.
Yeah. And the point
That's
there
astonishing
it is astonishing, and
juxtaposition.
And the point is that I don't want anyone to think, oh, white people are bad. Obviously, no, they're not. Asian people, there is a thread running through Asian culture and Asian society which is incredibly colourist. I think we all know that, and it's terrible. Not all Asian people, but there is, and I don't like this narrative that you can't be. Discriminatory because you're Asian, or perhaps even if you're black, because colorism is something that exists. And, Asian people, some of them can be incredibly racist, I think. But people will tell me, no, you can't be racist. Well, I think you can.
You return with your mum. You go back initially, I think, to the
I couldn't believe that.
to the hellish school that you've described, but you do
for
then
2 months.
For 2 months, but you survive that, and you get on to a new school, and that is, and I think when you arrive at that new school, because they think you've come straight from Pakistan, they're assuming that you don't have any English, or that your English isn't particularly good, that you're not especially bright, and that again seems to be a big moment for you, because that sparks something else in you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'll show you.
Yeah, I don't think that that never occurred to me. I wonder if maybe I don't know if you provided CVs back then, or kind of educational records, because I'd obviously come from the hellish school. But maybe they did think, oh, well, hang on a minute, where were you for this 6 months? Oh, you're in Pakistan. I don't know. But anyway, they made a very foolish presumption that I might not be very good at English, because they put me in this extra English class, and I was like, oh, fantastic, extra English. That must be because I'm really good at English. And it was just full of Asian girls. And I remember thinking, what? This is really mad. And then I suddenly, I think they realised that I didn't need to be in that class, so I just left. Walked out that day. And I remember thinking, well, that's not cool. And then there were other things that happened where it was kind of presumed that I might be a bit slow. It's really weird now to think of it, but back in the 80s, there was this presumption that if you weren't a bit smelly and smelt of curry and all the rest of it, that you might be a bit stupid, which obviously is not the case now. That perception does not exist now, I don't think. But there was a perception or a presumption that you might be a bit stupid. And I remember just thinking, well, you know what? I'm going to do something about this, because this is something I can control. I can't control how many friends I have or who wants to be my friend because of whatever. And I'm never going to be Miss Popular. I'm never going to be the head girl. I think we all know that. But one thing I can do to show off, maybe, possibly, is to be really, really good at my studies. It was literally the only thing I could control. So I just kind of, got on with my studies, and I did really well.
How old you're what, 15, 16?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, so you're a 16-year-old stoic then. You've worked out at that age, this is what I've got control of, this is what I don't have control of, and so I'm just going to concentrate on all the things that I can properly have an impact on.
Yeah.
Again, it's astonishing, sort of.
Is it? I don't know. I think surely some teenagers must. They must. I'm
sure some do, but perhaps not with everything that's gone before. I don't know.
I suppose not.
So the transformation then begins, and it is remarkable. You become a straight A student, 6A grade hires as they are in Scotland. And you go from, silent, shunned loner to the first Asian girl to be on the honours board at your school, your name in gold letters. The first Asian girl. Yeah. Not the last, I'm sure. No. You're the smartest kid in school. I mean, it's astonishing. Your book is called A Pebble in a Pebble in the Throat. But isn't this... and this isn't my metaphor, it's someone else's, but isn't this actually more pebbles in the sort of river, right? That all these little things that you're doing are slowly getting higher and higher and higher, and then suddenly you break through the surface and you're sort of breathing clean air, and off you go. It's an astonishing thing that happened, but you don't... You don't see it that way, do you?
I think it was very, very, what's the word? It was very pleasing and satisfying to prove a lot of people wrong, and to show the way that perhaps, I don't know, the first Asian footballer showed people that, Asians can play football, many years later, to show that actually Asians could be clever. And, they could get straight A's. And, I did A levels after that actually as well, but because I was just too young to go to university at that point. But I remember just thinking, I'm really pleased I've done that, because I've succeeded at something. I felt that I'd succeeded at something for the first time in a long time. My other thing I loved doing is I loved running and I wanted to be the fastest. And I was the fastest, I think, at primary school. But then when I went to secondary school, there were people obviously who were faster than me, and I hated that. But I remember thinking, okay, what can I be really good at? What can I beat everyone at? And it was, I suppose, half of it was about beating people, and the other half of it was about confounding expectations or pulping stereotypes, because there were a lot of them around back then. I'm sure there still are today. There are different ones. But I just remember just feeling really intoxicated by it, and I wanted to do more of that. But actually, it became harder as I you go to university, and it's much harder, especially when you pick the wrong subject to study.
Bigger pool, right? There's still the sadness of your brother in the background. Now, obviously, a growing man, and it becomes impossible, really, for your mum to deal with his outbursts. One particularly worrying moment, I think, that involves you, that you mention in the book. He gets sectioned. That is the only choice, really, for your parents, so that he gets the treatment and the care he needs. How do you sort of look back now at what, again, must have been, because we've got this transformation happening, but then you've also got this terrible sadness.
I just remember thinking, I was relieved, I was sad. It was an absolute inevitability that it was going to happen, because we'd just been delaying it, I think, because Asian people believe in keeping everything in the family. Again, I'm generalizing, but I think Asian people of that generation in the 80s, or I think it was maybe about 1990 by then, don't believe in, putting your mother in a home. Don't believe in any of that stuff. Don't believe in giving your child to anyone. You deal with it yourself. But we just couldn't. We didn't have an extended family. It was just the six of us, and my mum and dad were running a business, the petrol stations, and they just couldn't cope. And it just became far too much. He obviously wasn't on the right medication. If he was on any medication at that point, I don't even know. So it was like I remember the day, actually, and it was just, everything went so quiet after that. And I remember my mum just looked really, she looked kind of broken and relieved at the same time. It was just really, really weird. And I just remember thinking, well, this was always going to happen. But there was also the sense of failure as well, that we didn't manage to keep him. And that was horrible, because all of our lives up to that point had been built around him. Everything was built around him, and quite rightly so. And so you take that piece of the scaffolding away, and everything just kind of, I don't know, it felt really odd. It was a bit like having your leg or your arm removed, because, we had always been a six, there'd always been 4 kids, and then... And
you've been especially close.
Yeah,
the two
because of the age thing. But we didn't have a great, a relationship, because he was
what had happened,
non-verbal.
Aasmah? You sort of touch on it in the book, but basically, because he'd now become a grown man, when he had a tantrum, an outburst, it became potentially violent.
Yes, I mean, I think, again, I can't remember exactly what happened, but he was always chucking things, like, there were vases. My mum had loads of glass ornaments. They were all broken. They were all in the bin. Everything was broken. Lamps were broken. He just had this anger, and it always had to come out. You couldn't calm him down. Like, if you got angry now, I don't know you that well, but I think I'd be able to calm you down. With my brother, it had to come out because of his condition, and because it was untreated and unmedicated at that point. So when he was throwing objects around, it was almost manageable. But when he started to interact with us, like he was driving with my dad once, and he lunged at the steering wheel, and they almost ended up in a ditch. I think my dad was just so shaken by that, and that was frightening. And then there were some other incidents. I can't remember them all. I think I've tried to forget them, actually, especially if they involve my parents in any way. But then there was this one, I can't remember, he just started like pushing me, and then I ended up on the floor, and then I think he was kicking, and that was the day when my mum, she just picked up the phone, and I felt so guilty. I felt guilty for a long time, but I also mixed in with that was, my mum said to me, she said, if it hadn't been that, it would have been me, or it would have been your dad, or it would have been someone, something had to happen.
Your mum writes very movingly about it in the book, because you get both of your perspectives on it. How is your brother now?
So he is in a much better place. Obviously, he was in one particular quite horrible to us institution for 16 years or so, and then he eventually we managed to get him out. A lot of families have struggled to get their family members out of these places. There's been quite a few cases of that recently, and then I think he went through kind of a few different iterations of supported accommodation until he found the right one. But he's on medication. He lives in a kind of supported accommodation, maybe 50 miles or so away from my parents. He seems to like it. There are no incidents. And he's dropped off at my mum and dad's once a week. I'm not sure that he stays over. He did used to, but I'm not sure that he does. He might just come for dinner. I'm not sure. But there is that connect. They make a connection every week. So that's good. But my parents are happy with that because, my dad is 87. My mum is 78. They don't know how much longer they're going to be around, and they need to have made that transition and those arrangements before they're not here anymore. So in a way, they just feel more at peace about that. They feel prepared.
Tell us about the career and the start of the career with TV. Because TV wasn't necessarily your plan?
It's very weird. I mean, I think it's just a collection of just weird occurrences and opening newspapers and seeing adverts. So I finished my law degree. I did all the stuff. I thought, well, I can't not do anything with my law degree, even though I hate it. So I applied for articles to be a solicitor, and I got a job offer from somewhere, Plymouth or somewhere like that. I don't know. Solicitors in Plymouth. I remember thinking, do I want to be a solicitor in Plymouth? I don't think I do. No, I don't think I do. And then so I rejected that. And then I got a place at bar school. I didn't really know what that was either, but I thought being a barrister was more interesting than being a solicitor. And then you have to go and have these certain amounts of dinners, inns of court. So I went to one. I remember thinking, I'm not doing this. This is so boring. I'm just not doing it. I'm just not going to do it. So then I said to my mum, okay, I'm not going to do the bar thing either. And she was just like, well, everything's falling apart. You're supposed to be this really clever person, and now you have no job. What? And I was just like, I'll figure something out. Don't worry, I will figure something out. So I went back. I spent the summer just doing whatever it was I was doing, I can't remember. And then I saw in the paper there was an advert for a graduate trainee at STV, Scottish Television. And my sister already worked in TV. She worked for the BBC. And I just thought, I just devoid of any ideas. I thought, that sounds interesting. I'll apply for that. So applied for that, and 6 of us got taken on at that point, and I was one of them. And my first placement was in the newsroom. And I was just like running scripts and stuff like that. And I thought, this is really exciting. I really love this. And then they said to me that, the editor said to me, would you want to read the news? I was like, no, I would not. Why would I want to do that? I don't want people looking at me. I just can't think of anything worse. No, thank you. I'm quite happy doing this. I'm going to the press office next. It's going to be really interesting. And then I think he asked me again. And then someone said to me, you can't really say no. If you say no, you might be out on your ear kind of thing. You might end up being frozen out because you've said no. And I'm thinking, oh, right, okay, I'll do it. And then I did it. And I mean, there's some footage that STV put out recently, actually, in conjunction with the book. And it's horrendous. I mean, I was a really bad newsreader. I was really bad. I looked terrified. I'm not breathing in the right places. It's terrible. But it became a thing. And I wasn't the only Asian newsreader, because Scottish broadcasting is so far ahead of everyone else. Yes. Back in the 90s, there was already an Asian female newsreader. So there were 2 of us, which is pretty amazing. And we once presented the flagship evening news programme together, which is pretty phenomenal. Yeah. But because I stuck out, whenever I was walking around Glasgow, everyone would come up to me and say, you're that girl off the TV, what the rest of. And to be honest with you, I didn't really like that. I found that a bit, like, I wanted to be a success in my life, but I didn't want to be looked at. Because I have this, not fear, but I have this discomfort at being looked at. And I think that must stem back to, of course, when I was a kid and I was being looked at for the wrong reasons. So that's why I like radio. Yes.
And the radio career was pretty swift as a path of success for you. but not without its difficult days. I heard you talk, I think on another podcast, about a moment at the BBC which I found remarkable. 2003, I think, when you are asked to use the P word in a news report. And you question it, and it's given to someone else to read.
Yeah.
It's still read out.
Yeah.
I found that astonishing. 2003. I mean, in and of itself astonishing, but also given the story that we've just heard, that must have been really painful.
I just remember being really angry and thinking, hang on a sec, how, and you know what? It was an and finally story. It was just, it wasn't even like, you know, oh, someone, the MOD
It wasn't a report of someone using the word.
No,
it was a
kind of and finally story. I think I remember the story. The story was something like that the Home Office or some agency had to apologise because someone got sent a letter saying, "Dear Mr. P word." But it had been put at the end of the bulletin, which lessens its seriousness straight away. And I just remember thinking, I can't read this out. And they were really nice about it. They said, okay, fine, you don't want to read about it, not a problem. But I think I was at 5 Live at that point. And I was was it overnight or was it late night bulletin? And so it was read out on Radio 1 and somewhere else because I asked, because I knew who was on, and I messaged them on the internal system. I said, did you read this out? And they were like, yeah, I did. I thought it was a bit weird, but I read it out anyway. And I remember thinking, that's amazing. Anyway, so I complained, and then I was told by the head of news that it was fine, that there's nothing wrong with it. And I just remember thinking, well, this is what?
Astonishing, 20 years ago.
That's mad.
Yeah.
That is mad, isn't it? I
It
mean,
is mad.
how mad?
I was really surprised. I was surprised because I was expecting you to tell me it was much earlier.
Yeah.
At 2003.
The point I made was to someone was, hang on a sec, if that had been a word beginning with W that rhymes with banker, would you have said that? And they're like, no, but that's a swear word. And I said, well, there you go. It's so subjective, isn't it? If it doesn't affect you, then you don't understand it. And how bizarre that one's acceptable but the other is not.
Yeah, but obviously, I mean, we've touched on this already, but the progress that's been made over the last 20 years then, in your mind, has been extraordinary.
Absolutely. I mean, there were some people who say it's gone too far, and that, you know, we have to, every word is policed.
What's your view on that?
You have to be very, well, some people do say that though, don't they? Especially not just with race, but with heritage. Like, for example, if you say mixed race, some people prefer dual heritage. Some people don't mind. Some people are fine with mixed race.
You know, and with literature as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, of course, there's a whole, you know, gender issue as well. That's, you know, you have to get people's pronouns right, or it would be nice if you could get people's pronouns right. So language is, maybe policed is not the right word, but it's definitely scrutinised more than it was back then. And some people will say that it's gone too far. It's gone too much the other way. And it's difficult to have kind of relaxed conversations. But at least we don't use offensive words anymore. I mean, there has to be a bare minimum, doesn't there?
For sure. You get married in 2007. We touched on this at the start of the interview. But you make the decision, I think, not to have kids. But that changes quite late in life for you, relatively late in life. And your daughter arrives. I think she's 8 now, am I right?
She's almost 8.
She's almost 8. But the marriage doesn't survive, as you've told us. And you divorced, I think, 2 years ago. So this crisis of a very, very different kind.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you see that when you, in the sort of spectrum of crisis that we've been discussing. I think you see that as the most sort of visceral, because it obviously is not just about you.
Yeah. Definitely the most visceral, because I kind of didn't see it coming. It affected so many different things. It had so many repercussions. Because suddenly you're kind of on this island and you just see things drifting away from you, and you just think, oh no, I have to hang on to that. And what about this? And this person's drowning. And then you suddenly realise, well, I can't really hold this all together. I don't really know.
And it was an overnight thing.
Do.
It's one day you think your life is this, then the next day it's something else.
Yep. It was a very sudden thing. And I suppose, I'm probably, well, I do. I know that I think about it every day. I'm dealing with it. And I do have a lovely therapist, because there was at one point where I just thought our head's going to explode, or something awful is going to happen, because it was just too much. Because I was doing a really demanding job at the time. I was 1 year into Times Radio, and I'm getting up at 3:00. That's kind of demanding in itself. But then I couldn't go into work anymore because I couldn't leave my daughter, because my husband at the time had then left the house. He packed a bag and he left. And I just remember thinking, okay, what do I do? And it happened to be Easter, so I took 2 weeks off. And then I was like, what am I going to do now? So I think my mum or something came down for a week. And then I thought, okay, I know what? I've run out of options. So at that point, after quite a bit of toing and froing, I was able to present from home. But I didn't have a desk, I didn't have anything, so I had to do it from an ironing board. Quite a horrible one, actually. An ironing board with a computer on top and headphones plugged in, and cushions all around me. And my daughter was sleeping next door. I live in a really small house, tiny violin, 2 bedrooms, and our bedrooms are right next to each other. And I would go on air at 6, and I would just be like, please don't come in, please don't come in, please don't come in, because I still had that fear of appearing unprofessional.
Yes.
But we kind of know now, because of the pandemic and stuff, at the same time as that, there were people working from home, that it doesn't matter if your children breathe, or the world won't end. But I think as a woman, you are very alive to that.
You're more sensitive to it.
I think definitely. It's kind of like, oh God, can't you even control your family life?
Attached to it, yeah.
Totally. Yeah. But so I did that for, I think, 4, 5, 6 months. And then I had to come to an arrangement with her dad where, he came in at a certain time, and then, I can't remember actually now, I've tried to forget it, but, there've been lots of different stages of arrangements with her, and it's different today to what it was then, but it's an absolute mess, really. It's a mess. And I just think it's so unfair on her, really. It's really unfair. But I just don't know. I had no other option, really. For example, if I live with my mum, I know some single mums who got their mums in because they were able to, perhaps their mums didn't have their husbands anymore or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that is like the dream, isn't it? It's like you can just relax and you can do everything you need to do because your daughter is with someone trustworthy, reliable, who she loves, part of the family. But I didn't have any options, really. And I just rely on a lot of juggling, and not a very satisfactory situation, really, But I see it as temporary because I won't always be
the way forward.
Totally, and I won't always be doing, as much as I love my job, I won't always be doing that job. And I will be able one day to wake up my daughter in the morning and take her to school. One day soon, hopefully. Not too soon.
Your book is essentially a sort of transfer of memories and experiences, the good and the bad, as we've been discussing, from sort of one generation to another. In fact, from your grandmother, not just your mum, who also had a difficulty. She also features in the book. It's pretty grown-up stuff, but I think your daughter's read the book, hasn't she? Because she is a proper bookworm. So after so much silence in your life, your view clearly is that the answer lies in talking or writing. And perhaps as we are right now in chatting about this stuff.
Yeah. I don't. My parents were very different to how I am, and obviously there were two of them, so there's value in that, you can argue. Whereas my daughter has me, and then separately she has a dad. And I don't know what's better, what's worse, I've no idea. But I always try to talk things through with her. What happened today at school? How did that make you feel? How can we change that? I'd constantly talk through stuff with her because that didn't really happen to me. But I understand why it didn't happen to me because our experiences were different. But in terms of reading the book, I definitely wouldn't want her to read the book because I think it's too upsetting for her and too grown up for her. But I think I did give her an earlier draft and I said, use the back of it because she's always wasting paper. And then she said to me about 6 months later, I read it all. And I was like, really? Are you sure about that? And she said, yeah. Some of it was quite boring. Okay. Thanks very much.
There's your quote for the book.
Some of it's quite boring. Presumably the bits that were not about me, I suppose, you know, I don't know. But I think she obviously likes hearing about me when I was a kid, but perhaps not so much about something that was going on in 1950. I don't know, really.
Well, look, what an amazing thing, because there'll be a day when she sits and she does read it again properly in the right context. And what I would say, and I suspect anyone listening to us would agree, was, you know, what an amazing thing to have done, you know, for her. But also, I think, for anyone, as we've touched on in this conversation, for anyone who kind of is facing among many other things, the difficulties that you faced, I think it's a real guiding light for young girls who will find themselves in those kind of situations. Yeah. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you. It does feel like an achievement, I have to say. It does.
It shouldn't
really
just feel like an achievement. It is an achievement, a massive one. Thank you for this conversation. Thanks for talking to us. I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you, though, for your crisis comforts just before we finish. So 3 things that you rely on in the tough days, tough times. Can't be another person. What would you choose?
Fizzy cola bottles. I like them. I don't know if you've noticed in the book, there's a lot about food, there's a lot about sweets.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
And I'm not the sugar fiend that I used to be, but there's something very comforting about fizzy cola bottles. So I always have some of them on hand, and they just make me, I don't know, they calm me down a little bit, really, bizarrely.
Right.
That's a very specific food thing.
Okay.
This is really boring, but it really helps me, is tea. Not just drinking tea, but the act of making tea. Because I live in London where the water is disgusting and the tea tastes terrible. So what I've done over the last couple of years, when everything's been in crisis mode, has been to get all the paraphernalia. So the little infuser, tea leaves, the best ones from Fortnum & Mason. Yeah. And just go through the whole thing and then drink a really intensely flavoured cup of tea. That has always calmed me down. And it reminds me of my mum as well, who was always like, oh, I'm gasping for a cup of tea. And I never used to really understand that, but now I do. And then the last thing, I just love being in my bed. That calms me. That makes, even in the middle of the day, and I spend a lot of time in my bed because I'm always so tired.
For someone who has to get out of it at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
I just love being in my bed. I just love pulling up the covers, and I've got a really lovely bed with an amazing mattress. I spent loads of money on this mattress, and it's money well spent. Pulling up the covers, it reminds me of being a teenager, actually, and I used to take comfort then as well. And I just feel like I'm on a little island floating away from all my trouble. You know, I don't go there to hide. I go there to reset, and I do it a lot. I do it every single day, actually. That's my calming. Some people smoke a cigarette. Some people have a drink. Some people have cola bottles. But that actually is the thing that I do most days, and I couldn't do without it.
Amazing. I asked you to be specific. You were very specific. Amazing. Thanks for this conversation, Aasmah. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please do give us a rating and a review. It really helps. And if you hit subscribe, wherever you download your podcast from, you'll find loads more useful crisis conversations. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and you can watch the full episodes on YouTube. Just search for Crisis What Crisis Podcast. You can also find full transcripts of this and every episode on our website, crisiswhatcrisis.com. Thanks again for joining us.